Well, to our top story, a federal judge under fire for apologizing to the suspect at the center of the White House Correspondent dinner shooting over his treatment while in custody. You heard me right. He apologized to him. And this is not the first time this judge has apologized to a defendant of the same nature. Judge Zia Faruqui has been under the national spotlight for some time now, with critics claiming he prioritizes criminals over the American public. Unbelievable. Hello, everyone. This is Outnumbered. I'm Kayleigh McEnany. Here is my co-host, Harris Faulkner. Also joining us, Molly Hemingway, Fox News contributor, Lisa Booth, Fox News political analyst, and Dr. Mark Siegel, Fox News senior medical analyst, professor of medicine at NYU Langone Health, and author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, The Miracles Among Us: How God's Grace Plays a Role in Healing. While Cole Allen remains in federal lockup, the judge directly addressed him in court, saying this, quote, "What I am to say to Allen, that this is going to be a fair process if we're putting him in a safe cell when he's not supposed to be in there. At a minimum, I should be apologizing to him. We are obligated to make sure he's taken care of. Mr. Allen, I'm sorry that things have not been the way they are supposed to." Now, that apology has U.S. Attorney for D.C. Jeanine Pirro fired up. She posted this: "Welcome to Washington, D.C., where U.S. Magistrate Judge Faruqui believes a defendant armed to the teeth and attempting to assassinate the president is entitled to preferential treatment in his confinement compared to every other defendant." Now, as we noted, this is not the first time that the judge has apologized to a defendant who's openly wanted to kill the president. In September of 2025, he acknowledged to Edward Dana, a man who was charged for what the Justice Department and U.S. Secret Service said was a threat to kill President Trump. Dana spent a week in jail only to have the charges against him dropped. And Faruqui said that the U.S. is past the point of constitutional crisis as the Trump administration is playing cops and robbers like children. The judge looked at the defendant, who is a person of color, and said that the government's message to people who look like Mr. Dana is to be very afraid, before adding, "I'm afraid right now." Now, U.S. Attorney Pirro sounded the alarm about Faruqui late last year, citing comments made by the judge that a felon's illegal gun possession, quote, "does not necessarily make them dangerous." She said this judge took an oath to follow the law, yet he has allowed his politics to consistently cloud his judgment. How, Lisa Booth, do people like this sit on the bench? I never thought I would hear, "I owe you an apology to a potential assassin."
Well, yeah, because, I mean, we should be focused on deterrence here when we live in this environment of heightened political violence, whether it's three attempted assassination attempts against President Trump, the murder of Charlie Kirk, or even the attempted assassination of Justice Brett Kavanaugh and some of the other justices. So we should be focused on deterrence. I will say with this judge, at least he's been consistent. He also defended the rights of January 6 defendants as well in 2022. So he at least seems to be consistent across the political spectrum. So maybe not as politically charged here. But this also represents sort of the friction that we've seen with President Trump's Justice Department and Washington, D.C. I mean, we've seen grand juries not go along with some of the charges being brought against people in Washington, D.C. And also in 1 week, we saw 2 defendants had their charges dropped and not move forward who threatened President Trump. So I guess more broadly, I'm concerned about this, this increased heightened political violence that we live in, and judges not doing enough to deter it.
Let me also add to the stellar resume of this judge, Harris. Senator Tim Sheehy said this: "This is the same judge who tried to release the man who beat up Congresswoman Angie Craig despite 25 bench warrants. This judge should be in jail, not on the bench."
Yeah, it's interesting. I spent some time watching something that probably no one's ever heard of called Grab the Gavel. That's a podcast that he used to do. It was in academia, and it went for a couple of years. And the focus was mainly DEI. Many of his guests, he pointed out their gender and the fact that they were people who look like him and that sort of thing. So he does have this in his history. And you know what? If you want to be wedded to DEI for moving up in the American society, I guess that's your option. The problem with it is, though, that's kind of the prism that you start to see him approach everything. So you've got a man before you, 2, because you pointed out the previous assassin that he apologized to, or a suspected assassin. But is this person becoming an assassin apologist at this point, would be my question. because it's not just about the suicide watch. It's about the vegan meal. And he said, well, if we can get you a vegan meal, we can get you a Bible. Nothing wrong with that. You want everybody to have, you find prayer a lot of times behind bars. We know that that's true. Not poking any fun with what this guy's asking for. But is it the judges, the magistrate judge, is it his responsibility to apologize? And I think he's acting on behalf of all of us as he roots out crime and adjudicates from the bench. Does he speak for all of us when he apologizes to a suspected would-be assassin? I guess that's a question that people will have to ask. Does he open the door for us to take a close look at every single decision he makes, perhaps closer for him because of the decisions and the actions that he's made in the past, which are clouded by his own personal prism and views of the world? They're navels. We all have one. We all have an opinion. I get it. But from the bench, I thought justice was blind.
Yeah, you know, and we need accountability. I see this a lot. Viewers saying, I'm so tired of stories like this. Where's the accountability? And there are people with good ideas. I spoke with Senator Tim Sheehy about the Jail Act, which would allow you to hold judges accountable. It's legislation that could be passed on the Hill. Let's say if the Hill nuked the filibuster. Also, already in place, 28 U.S.C. 631, Molly, allows for the removal of a magistrate judge if, in fact, they show incompetence, misconduct, or neglect of duty. This, to me, is neglect of duty. There's legislation in place already. So it's time for the D.C. judges to get together and get this guy out.
Well, I think it's both incompetence and neglect of duty. I mean, the particulars of this case, the man who attempted to commit mass murder had admitted himself that he was on a suicide mission. He said he expected not to survive. He planned that out. So that a question of whether he was suicidal or not, which is what this judge apologized for, he'd been put in special handling because of his suicidal nature, and he's apologizing for that. Well, when the guy admits and writes a letter to his family saying he expects that this mission will end with his death, it's not even really up for debate. But there are these bigger issues. I mean, first of all, D.C. was horrific for January 6 defendants. It seemed like nobody was caring about the rights of the people who were arrested as part of that mass operation. And we have this situation where the left is in general supporting violence, political violence. And it seems that this judge is part of that. You are absolutely right, Kayleigh. There are things that can be done. If a judge is not restoring order, he absolutely should be removed. We have a pretty good Supreme Court. I just wrote a book about one of the justices, Alito. They do seem to care about rule of law. But when you get to those lower federal judges, you start seeing some major problems, or other judges. And the people do get to have a say. If they're not bringing order to the streets, which is one of their primary functions, then they should be removed.
And, you know, this is particularly important because it's about assassinating a president, a would-be assassin. It's also important, though, Dr. Siegel, when you think about the young women out there who have been murdered after guys with 23 priors are released, 40 priors. These judges need to be removed if you're responsible for the murder of a U.S. citizen because you let a guy out of jail.
Let's start right there. Faruqui actually said last year that if you're a felon, you still can carry a gun. You should be able to carry a gun. And that gun could be used against a young woman. So that's number one. To Molly's point about Suicide Watch, absolutely Suicide Watch is mandatory here. If you didn't do Suicide Watch to somebody that says they don't expect to exit the room, that would be medical incompetence. The real point I want to make, though, is the word sedition. What is sedition? Sedition is attempts to overthrow the government and using force to back it up. So this is sedition. It isn't just an assassination attempt against the President of the United States. It isn't just shooting an agent who'd be dead right now if he didn't have a vest. It's an attempt to overthrow the government. So with that kind of politics going on, how could you possibly be talking about the rights of the perpetrator here?
Yep, and an apology. I never thought I'd hear it. I didn't believe it when I read it.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.